We're about to begin bonding adamantium to Weapon X's skeleton.
Adamantium, the indestructible metal that coats Wolverine's skeleton. It sounds cool, right? But have you ever stopped to think about how horrific the process would actually be? Well, today we're going to dig into the science behind Wolverine's transformation, and we're going to expose the gruesome reality of the Weapon X procedure to see if Logan's survival was even remotely possible. It's brutal, it's bizarre, and it raises a ton of questions, and that's why I reached out to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Quinn Schroeder, to help me break down this process scene by scene, diving into the science, the speculation, and the sheer madness of it all. So get ready to see Wolverine's transformation like never before. Bub.
You don't want what I've got.
Today, we have an awesome reaction style interview for you. That's right. We're going to be talking about one of the most iconic, unbreakable characters in the Marvel universe, and that would be Wolverine. That's right. With the new Deadpool and Wolverine movie that just came out, hopefully you've seen it, and if you haven't, there's no spoilers, so don't worry about it. We all know Wolverine for his adamantium claws, that insane healing factor, and his gruff personality. But today we're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to be taking a look at the science behind the Weapon X program that turned Logan into the ultimate cyborg. Joining me today, I am not doing it alone. I have one of the amazing guests who's been on the show before, Dr. Quinn Schroeder. He's a real life medical expert. He's a resident surgeon, and he's joining me to help break down and give medical insight to this transition process of Wolverine as he's implanted with adamantium metal. So welcome to the show, Dr. Schroeder. How are you doing?
Good, Victor. Thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure being on here. It's fun to take fiction and other modalities and other media and use them as an opportunity to teach. And that's what we're here to do today. What would happen if someone, more specifically Wolverine, would be infused with adamantium? Wolverine is actually probably even a stronger superhero than what we know. Let's start with this. We know he's powerful. He's practically ageless. He's a mutant with the ability to self-heal. And for all those superhero fans out there, I understand I wore my Batman scrub cap today, so I'm crossing over in universes, but it's the only one I had. Our goal here is to talk about just how powerful Wolverine is and what would happen if someone would actually be shot up with a full skeleton of adamantium.
Dr. Schroeder, what exactly is adamantium and what do we know about it?
Adamantium in the Marvel world is a fictional metal alloy, and it's virtually indestructible and has indestructible properties. Depicted as a secret government weapon, a secret government project, very high cost, and it's very rare. We're going to discuss the things we can and can't see here. I would argue Wolverine might be the toughest superhero ever once I show you what he's going through.
Dr. Schroeder, how do you break down the scene? What exactly is happening to Wolverine's body here?
So as he's lowered in the chamber, we get kind of a snapshot of his heart function and his cardiovascular system here. So let's do a check on this. Heart rate is 62. That's on the lower end. He must not be that nervous. He's just a badass dude all around. And really 60 to 100 is kind of what we call normal. So he's doing okay on that front. His blood pressure, 120 over 65. These two measurements really show the pressure when his heart squeezes and then when it relaxes. So it's 120 when the heart is tight and the muscles are squeezing. When it relaxes, it's about 65. And again, in a healthy male, it's about perfect. His mean blood pressure is 92, and as long as this is somewhere over 70 or so, this just means he's getting enough blood to his brain, he's getting enough blood to his kidneys, the arteries that supply his heart, and really all the internal organs and the rest of his body is being well perfused at this time.
All right, so Wolverine's about to be injected with liquid adamantium, and this is mentioned several times throughout the comic books and, in the movie as well. So, Dr. Schroeder, what do you see happening here?
Up to this moment, he's still at baseline. His heart rate and his mean blood pressure within normal limits. His systolic pressure is at 125, so that's creeping up a little bit from earlier, but hey, for having a dozen needles infused with basically the strongest metal known to man in liquid form, pointing at every part of your body, he's really doing all right. And he remains in what we would call a normal sinus rhythm. And this is just looking at the peaks and the valleys and the space between everything on the monitor. Yeah, so he's getting just on this scene, 1 in his forehead, 2 in his cheeks. Starts out like Botox gone horribly wrong. Most will never experience a temperature of 108 degrees, but this is an out of control fever that took, think about it, just took seconds to form from really part of it's this hot adamantium melting into his bones. He's being literally torched from the inside. We also call this hyperthermia, where the body takes on more heat than it can really dissipate. And even though he's laying in an ice cold tub, it's like they've thrown him into a bonfire. And at that temperature, we'll start losing their normal senses. Hearing and vision will be lost. They'll just be completely out of whack. Wolverine would have to fight back hallucinations, seizures, and eventually an all-out coma. So he's fighting a lot of stuff right now. And he should probably be taken to the ambulance, to the ICU. They would intubate him with a tube down his throat, and he'd be fighting for his life. If I could take a microscope into Wolverine's body, I would see 36 trillion cells in peril right now. That's 360 times the number of stars in the Milky Way. So Wolverine's cells should just be in spasm and basically self-combusting. This is something called protein denaturation. Every protein has a very specific structure. When the temperatures get too high, immediately these complex loops and bends and structures unravel and the protein loses its function. Here's an alternative. Maybe Wolverine's secret is having a bottomless bowl of heat shock proteins. But even those fall apart at really high temperatures. So again, my argument would be it does not even come close to comparing to the process he's going through right now.
All right, so let's talk about what's happening to Wolverine's bones as they're being engorged with adamantium. So what's known about the properties of adamantium? How does it fuse with the bones?
Yes, some people say it is a shell around the cortical bone, the outside bone, so to speak, and you can make arguments on how does that work. Others say it's infused in between the osteocytes or the bone cells. Hard to argue that as well. Some say it is a true molecular chemical reaction. Somebody needs to show me the chemistry of how that works, because I don't get how that would work. Either way, the arguments are made that it doesn't affect his anatomy whatsoever, and I'm here to show you exactly what it would do. Hear me out, just the heat from the adamantium, all right? Really immediately, and I mean immediately, Wolverine should be experiencing 4th degree burns from the inside out. And usually burns come from the outside in, but 4th degree means it goes down to bone. And the closest thing I can think of would be like him drinking metal or lava. Enough said on that. Also take many layers of tissue with it, from bones to the fascia and the muscles and eventually out towards the skin. So even if you want to argue to me that bones don't change from adamantium, that's fine. I'll accept it. But everything around the bones would, everything adjacent, everything nearby. All right. So let's look at it this way. Some of our largest veins and arteries hug bones. All right. It's kind of their safe zone. They're up against it. And in this slice, you can imagine the radial and the ulnar arteries pressed up against the scalding bone in his arm. They would melt and spill boiling blood throughout every cavity of the body. It wouldn't be pretty. And again, Wolverine's a freak of nature and seems to handle the temperature pretty well so far. But even if we look at something like the nerves, the nerves in our body, they start in the brain and they run down really the back of our neck and down our back within the spinal column. And they branch into our arms and our legs and our internal organs. And along with the blood vessels, these nerves should be fried immediately, just absolutely immediately. And as the bones heat up, the spinal cord would melt and cause further convulsions and just unfathomable pain and loss of movement and reflexes and just all out paralysis. And here's another major issue that Wolverine would also have to overcome. Muscles attached to bones via tendons, all right? So I can bend my arm and my biceps attaches to the tendon, which attaches to the bone, okay? And have you ever seen someone tear their biceps or tear their Achilles? Aaron Rodgers, more famously last year. So when a muscle or tendon snap, there's kind of this it's kind of a tsunami reaction underneath the skin. Ligaments would detach and all bones would just fall apart. Cartilage sits at the end of the bones and fascia, and all of it would be fried crispy. Early arthritis would ensue, and I guess early would be a relative term here because Wolverine's already very old by the time he even gets adamantium.
Heart rate well beyond maximum.
Blood pressure 260 over 180 and rising.
He can make it. He can make it.
Do you think he could make it?
Yeah, to put it lightly, this would be some serious stuff. We call this hypertensive crisis, 260 over 180 and rising, so to speak. So what are some things that would be going on? Again, to either any normal human being, or what kind of things is Wolverine's body overcoming simultaneously with everything else we've already talked about? So with blood pressure so high, eventually you could get brain injury. Most people would be at very high risk of a stroke or vessel rupture. The increased blood pressure increases the blood flow and the pressure to the brain. It would just all around, possibly permanently worsen your mental status.
Ooh.
You get hemorrhages throughout the brain. You could get in the retinas, so like bursting of the blood vessels behind the eye. You get kidney injury, blood in the urine, red urine, fluid in the lungs because of the imbalance of the pressures. You could get what's called aortic dissection or aneurysm, and really even heart failure. All right. So this is where the pressure is so high that it can really rip and form new parts in blood vessels and really lead to very high risk of rupture. Again, on any organ, anywhere throughout his body, you could make this argument, and he is constantly healing from it. But anybody would be at risk of multi-organ failure and damage pretty quickly. But people can live through it, especially if it happens slowly over time. But they usually can't live for it for a very long time without severe complications. But to put it in perspective, someone like Franklin D. Roosevelt famously had an estimated blood pressure of something like 350 over 195 at the time of his death. And lived with the blood pressure that they say later in life around 260 over 150. So in this instant, really Wolverine's blood pressure is not his most pressing issue, but
so teeth, hair, it looks like his whole head and his brain is melting. This cannot be good. What's happening here?
Yeah, it's literally looks like it's up in flames. This is just adding insult to injury here. Besides the heat, there would be so much fluid in his brain that the sheer pressure would squeeze it and it'd be like a Nerf ball. He herniate out through his eye sockets and the hole at the base of his skull, and pressure is really a matter of physics. Skull surrounds the brain, so as the skull heats up, the effects will start out superficial and would probably work their way deep, right? If that makes sense. So as that adamantium heats up, the front of his head, his neurons would be, again, in kind of a fervor, and Wolverine would lose all ability to act normal in social situations. The top of his brain helps understand language and feel objects and knowing his right from his left. All this would just be in jeopardy. Losing the sides of his brain would kill the parts that help him hear and help him understand language. Losing the back of his brain would make him go colorblind at first, and then probably permanently blind seconds later. Once the part of his brain called the cerebellum goes dark, this is kind of the back of the head and lower, really Wolverine loses all his feral function, so to speak, like balance and motor skills, some of these old primitive functions. And I guess I suppose those are important parts for somebody nicknamed Wolverine, but really, and then his brainstem, right? So this is the part that comes out of his brain would catch a lot of issue, and it would affect his heart rate, and it would affect his breathing, and the temperature would also skyrocket even worse than it already is. Lose long-term memory. He would lose the ability to feel hungry or feel thirsty. He wouldn't be able to regulate his body temperature anymore. He wouldn't know the proper times of the day, or when to be awake or when to be asleep. All his hormone regulation would be off. And MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. So it's a big magnet is basically what it is. And anyone who's had an MRI knows the number one thing you can't bring with you to get an MRI is metal. So the slightest metal would not only skew the picture, so that you wouldn't know what's going on with his brain, but the bigger problem is that the machine magnet is so strong it could rip the metal clear out of his body, nick something else that wouldn't be good. And so it's not probably a good idea to be shooting MRIs as you're shooting a relatively foreign metal substance that's also liquefied into his body. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I love you.
You're not an animal.
Dr. Schroeder, did that monitor just say that heart rate was at 315 beats per minute?
And climbing pretty quickly. So this is a joke. This is near impossible. He would need defibrillation. Something this high, like I said, which is nearly impossible. We would call something like supraventricular tachycardia or some sort of insane arrhythmia. All right, max heart rate for humans is, I don't know, probably around 300, and it doesn't mean anything once it gets up to there. And so what would be happening if beats are 300 plus? All right, so let's talk about how the heart works. All right, the heart is a just magnificently designed organ. It's essentially a pump, which pumps blood to the rest of the body despite many other functions. But let's just talk about that. The heart works in like this perfect harmonic rhythm. It has pumps up top, the atria, which pump blood into the bottom, called the ventricles, and those then pump blood to the lungs and the rest of the body. And so when that heart is working at 60 to 100 beats per minute, you have this perfect rhythm. And if you're an athlete or you have a higher rate, that's fine. But once we get up to these levels, we have issues. So it takes a certain amount of time for that blood to fill each of these voids, each of these pumps. And once that heart gets into, 315 beats a minute, the heart's basically just quivering. Blood's going nowhere. It's turbulent. It's circulating back and forth. The valves aren't working. There's nothing of substance going on. So essentially, he is not moving blood around his body, nor would anybody with the heart rate this high. You would need defibrillation. Heart would have no time to fill. I don't know, something like an ultrasound. It's just not good. One part we didn't even talk about is that the metal, the ribs, at least most of them are metal, and big portions of them are metal. And there's a kind of this expanding function to the ribs that allow your lungs to fill with air and then retract. And so the fact that you've now changed all those to metal, adamantium may really again lead us back to improper lung function, improper ability to fill with oxygen, get oxygen to the brain or other tissues, possibly intubation or some sort of assisted breathing apparatus. So again, these are all just things that Wolverine, his healing factors define physics, it's define physiology, it's define anatomy. I guess he's fixing all these things at once. So pretty amazing.
All right, so Dr. Schroeder, we know that this adamantium is embedded into all of his bones, right? His limbs, his ribs, his skull, everywhere. I mean, now he has these adamantium claws. What does this do to his weight, right? Because we know that adamantium is a very heavy metal. What is Wolverine going to weigh?
So we did the math, all right? So according to the comics, adamantium adds 105 pounds to Wolverine's 195-pound frame, all right? So this is going to equal about 300 pounds. He should really sink like a rock in water. And let's just, for the fun of it, let's just say this: 14% of the body weight on the average human being is bone. All right, so if we do the math, he's got about 132 pounds of bone in him. I don't know. Fun fact: when Wolverine dies, his bones will fetch maybe $100 in scrap metal, or I guess someone can melt them down like the Mandalorian Beskar, and sell them back to Stryker for a better return. So I guess whoever finds his body can do a little or a lot with what's left of him.
Did he have to go through all this torture and this pain and physiological breakdown?
And there probably would have been a better way to do it. Number one probably would have been something like a suit or an exoskeleton, something more like Iron Man, that probably would have been the best way. But Maybe I could give another recommendation to Colonel Stryker. Probably likely he would have benefited just from slowing down the transformation. You could have considered that. Maybe you should have done it over hours or days, or maybe just a couple bones at a time, try out a bone or two and go from there. But that wouldn't be good for cinema. But I'm just saying, maybe not smart on such a precious weapon on Colonel Stryker's part to just try it all at once. There probably would have been a better way.
I think you heard you.
So Dr. Schroeder, let's summarize. So overall, we know that this video was all fiction. We're taking a Marvel Universe film and we're trying to break it down and talk about Wolverine's adamantium implantation process. But even with that process, you're absolutely sure that a real normal human being could not survive this.
I'm absolutely sure, Victor, that I can say with confidence. No.
So no.
I've enjoyed being on. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so absolutely. Thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Schrader. It's a pleasure. We'll definitely have you back for more fun videos.
So there you have it. We took a deep dive into the agonizing, scientifically questionable world of Wolverine's adamantium transformation. And even with his mutant healing abilities, it's hard to imagine anyone surviving that procedure. It just goes to show how incredibly resilient Logan is. But hey, that's the beauty of comic books, right? You can bend reality and create epic stories. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and do me a favor, hit that like button, and let me know down below in the comments if you'd like to see more reaction style videos like this for other superheroes or other bizarre things out there. All right, and until next time, this is Victor from Cyborg for Life, signing out. Peace.